Well, let's go ahead and start then. No one else is coming in to admit that's only more. 14 people, that's not good at all. All right. I'm gonna move the problem with Zoom is it shows your pictures, which is good. But then I noticed on the YouTube that our pictures are part of the presentation, which is not good. So what I want to do tonight is a couple of comments on Porter to finish up Porter. Some things I think are really, really important on Porter. And then get into this idea of an economic moat. Economic moats are primarily paper 3, but I think you're going to find they're going to really help you with paper 1, especially with the barriers to entry. An economic moat is a barrier to entry for a company, but it can also be a barrier of entry to an industry. So I'm still admitting people here, so let's see. So let me start slideshow. So I told you I would do this. So remember last class I said at the end of your Porter's analysis, I think it'd be really good to have some kind of summary chart. And so I created this. You might have to, I'll try to get this to you somehow, but you might want to actually snip a picture of this on your computer. I'll try to remember to put it out there as an example. So what I did is one of our former students did a paper on Micron. And so I went to his Micron paper and I just took his Porter's analysis and just really high level, I summarized each of the areas. And you can probably make it look fancier than this, use some color coding or something to make it look a little nicer. You know, maybe put some colors in the title and highlight the overall summary at the end. I probably should have done that. Maybe blue titles here and maybe yellow or something at the bottom just to separate it. But I have the 5 forces in overall summary, and I took what he said in each section, and then I took his overall summary to see what is he saying. What does Porter's 5 forces say about this industry? He was doing DRAM and NAND because his company was Micron, and he had to really almost talk about his 2 different industries. But I took the summary of them too in there. Is everybody with me? Everybody's good? So on the threat of new entrants, first thing he said is this industry has very high property, plant, and equipment requirements, which leads to economies of scale. Having large P&P requirements is not the exact same thing as economies of scale. Economies of scale, what that means is the next product you produce has a lower marginal cost. That's economies of scale. So if you produce 50, it's a lot cheaper than producing 40. There are industries that have large property, plant, and equipment that don't have economies of scale. So airlines is a perfect example of that. So this is an industry that has large property, plant, and equipment requirements, which is a barrier to entry. So the fact that airlines have to buy these huge jet planes, that's a barrier to entry. But they also, on top of that, have economies of scale. So I said this is, look at the way I have it. You notice, again, I don't use the word strong and weak. I say positive impact on industry growth is positive. Threats of substitutes, his argument was the particular products this industry is producing has very specific product functionality, very unique. There really is no substitutes. So I don't know this industry well enough because it's tech, but I took his word for it and said positive there. Then on buyer power, you notice I have switching costs both under buyer and supplier. We're going to talk about switching costs. We talked about economic moats, but buyer power was negative because the buyers had very low switching costs. The supplier power is negative because this industry had very high switching costs. All right, so it's important you know which you're talking about. So the buyer of this industry's products, they can easily switch between one provider or another. They don't really care. It's very easy to switch one out and put another one in. However, the companies that supply this industry, their products are very unique, very specialized. It would be very expensive for Micron to actually switch to another provider, another supplier. So you see switching costs. You want high switching costs for buyers, and you want to have low switching costs for your suppliers. But in this case, both are negative for them. And in competitive rivalry, it was intense competition due to the low buyer switching costs. So he linked these two up. Because the buyers can easily switch between one company versus another, that created a lot of rivalry within the industry, and that was negative. And I just said overall it leans positive. He was a little bit more nebulous in his final conclusion, but who knows what the right answer is here. But then on the overall summary, I brought out what I thought were the two most important positives and the one most important negative, and brought that into the end. Does this feel comfortable to y'all? Does that y'all see what I'm after here at the end?
Yes.
I have some students that don't give me any conclusion after Porter. So at least if you think about this table, you need to still write a paragraph or two to summarize it and bring it all together. Give me your overall final conclusion. But I think this table will help you get to that spot. All right. I want to talk a little bit more about substitution threat. I'll come back to this one. So the threat of substitution, one thing I want you thinking about here, it's a well-known term that I don't know if you've heard undergraduate, but there's a gentleman named Clayton Christensen. I encourage you to read most of his stuff, if not all of his stuff. He was a very good writer. He passed away last year, unfortunately. The first book of his I read was this one, Seeing What's Next. I've read a few of his other books, and this one still is my favorite one. But I don't know if you've heard the term disruptive innovation, but he is the inventor of disruptive innovation, and I'll show you an article about his theory. But the idea that there's something out there that's going to completely disrupt this industry, and I'll give you some keys to how to look for that. What I love about this book, I'm not saying you have to read this book for this class, but I would put it on your reading list here pretty soon. What he does is he explains the theory of disruptive innovation, when it works, when it doesn't work, what are the signs that it's actually happening. I mean, a good example is a key player, a large player in the industry. You'll suddenly hear them saying things like, we're focusing on our core competencies. What does that mean, core competencies? It means they're willing to give up business because there's some new person coming in and taking off their least profitable business. That's a good sign that there's some disruptive innovation coming in. I don't know if you've ever heard the S curve. I don't know if that sounds familiar, but the S curve is when you have this disruptive innovation, it tends to be really flat for a while. You hardly notice it forever and ever and ever. In fact, it's so slow moving that the main players in the industry start ignoring it like it's no big deal. And then suddenly you get this shot up, this immediate shot up where overnight, an industry that was solid, was making money, is suddenly out of business. So Blockbuster is a perfect example. It's pretty amazing on Blockbuster. I don't know, y'all may have never heard of Blockbuster. I forget how many years ago that was. But Blockbuster, some of their best years were right before Netflix took them out. They were having, Wall Street loved them. They were very profitable. I've been to Blockbusters. Now it seems kind of crazy that we would do that because they never had anything I wanted to watch, just like Netflix doesn't. But it's amazing how quickly Netflix jumped into that market. And then Netflix, when they moved to digital, I mean, that was the end. That was the death of Blockbuster. What did Blockbuster say? Well, that's not our business. They're mailing stuff out in the mail. Our customers want their CDs. They want to watch their movies tonight. They don't want to wait 3 or 4 days. Well, Netflix, once they went to digital, that killed that entire model. Someone's doing Netflix, and I'm going to be curious if Netflix still mails out CDs. I've heard, last time I heard, they still do. I just think that's pretty remarkable. But so that's what Seeing What Next means. It's disruptive innovation. So I want to show you an article from The Economist here. So I have to switch over. It's a kind of an old article, but it's just about the concept. So you don't really need anything more up to date than that. So let me share the screen. Have any of y'all seen Christensen in your classes? Anybody sound that familiar? Maybe in your capstone class? Sounds like a no, so it's a complete
I
no.
have not.
No one has. I think you see Christensen more in graduate school than undergraduate, but I actually think it's something I would encourage you to read about because I think it would actually give you an edge in interviews. He's not as well known as Porter, obviously, but he's very highly respected. He's a really nice guy too. He writes. You can tell reading his books that he's a good straight shooter, nice guy, friendly. So here's an article from The Economist called "Pardon the Disruption." So creative destruction. So Christensen, Harvard Business School, he called it disruptive innovation. The term is now everywhere. So Uber disrupting taxi businesses. I have no idea what that is. Cronuts disrupting breakfast, Twitter. So this is an old article, obviously. His work, he's talking about new technology that is inferior. So that's key. You're not looking for someone coming into your business that has it all figured out. Usually a disruptive innovator goes after the fringe. We're going to talk about with Porter the focus strategy, those that are focused just on a particular sector of a market. That's usually where a disruptor comes in. Their products are inferior. There may be lower costs. Maybe they do one really specific thing that a particular buyer wants. And because of that, the big players in the industry are like, hey, we're not worried about it. We don't compete in that market. It's not that profitable anyway. But it has some desirable attributes that for some reason they're making inroads. So why don't established firms take them out? And they do. When you read Christensen, he talks about when does Walmart take a competitor out and when does Walmart miss? Why did Walmart take out so many competitors, but then Amazon came in? Why is Walmart not being able to compete with Family Dollar and Budget, General, whatever those firms are? What is it about them that Walmart couldn't figure out? And so he's done a lot of work on that. He has a lot of really good research. In fact, one thing I love about his book, in fact, I'll look at his book. One thing he does in his book is after he does his theory, every chapter after that is industry after industry. He gives an example in each industry of what he sees coming. It's probably too dated now for your purposes, but he talks about the airlines industry, the education industry, semiconductors, telecom, and he talks about what innovations he's seen that could take them out. It'd be interesting for me to go read the book again and see how accurate he was in these industries. So established firms should have a big advantage. They have better trained employees. They got the infrastructure. They got all that property, plant, and equipment. They can have economies of scale. They should be as good as the new entrants. Yet what they're discovering is that these old firms in fast evolving industries, they're actually set up to fail. They tend to put their research budgets where their margins are the highest. They don't want to put money in the places where margins are low, which is where these disruptors are jumping in. They're unable to adequately to invest in new businesses without killing their own old business. I think that's what's really impressive about the history of Netflix and Intel. Netflix and Intel were both willing to create the next generation product even before they fully monetized the previous product. But most firms are not willing to do that. So if you have a business that you're looking at has one segment that's really profitable, that may be a negative for them because they may not be willing to move to the next innovation because they don't want to invest in that. They're like, we got to invest. And you think about Western Union, y'all probably hardly ever deal with Western Union, but Western Union was given the rights to Bell Telephone. Alexander Bell was going to sell Western Union the rights to the telephone, and Western Union said, hey, we've got all this money invested in, I've already forgot the word, telegrams. Our businesses like telegrams. We've got relationships with them. No one wants to talk on the phone with somebody else. And so they didn't do that. Now, Western Union still exists today, but they're just a money exchanger. But if you look back at why they missed that, and Christensen talks about that in his book, you think how stupid could they be? But when you actually look at it and look at their financials and what decisions they made, it was actually a very rational decision based on where their investment was. So it's really hard for old established firms to do this. Profitable firms underinvest in competing technology for fear of hastening the end of that profitability. So that cannibalization is a big issue. Bosses may not be thinking as long-term as they should be because they've got to meet next quarter's numbers, and they'll let a new competitor go for a while, and then by the time they react, it's too late. So react to threats. Now, one thing I think is really interesting today is the Googles, the Facebooks, Microsoft. What they do today is they just buy those competitors because those firms have so much cash, and that's pretty frustrating. I'm surprised. I'm sure someone's thinking about buying Zoom, and how could they do that? Google buying YouTube, Microsoft buying Skype. Maybe it's too late now. I hope no one does. I hope they stay out there and be competitive. But it does bother me in this market that we're shutting down competition because these massive tech firms, they just buy any threat that's out there. They may even shut them down after they buy them just so they don't have to worry about that. So it is a different world today. So there's organizational rigidities. A firm can be seen as a giant information processing organizations that evolve a structure and personnel that fits their existing business. They're looking at sales. They're looking at the stuff that doesn't work for a disruptive innovation. So, I wish you could all go out and read the book because I think it would help you with insights to your firm. But I want you thinking in terms of disruptive innovation. Think in terms of, let's say you pick Blockbuster as your company 3 years before Netflix starts taking over. What is there out there that shows you that's about to happen so you can really see it coming before other investors do? So most firms do have something in place for changing market conditions, but they also have incentives, and that's the key word. They have incentives that actually discourage employees from looking at those things because they're trying to hit existing goals. So that's something you can think about with your firm. What are they focused on? What markets? What revenue growth? What profitability? So in consistency and efficiency in production with established goods, that's what they're after. How can we get better and better and better at what we're doing versus radically destroying that and moving to something else? Now, what some firms have done is they create a disruptive subsidiary. And you'll see that with Google, with Alphabet. I'm sure Amazon similarly. Obviously, with Tesla and some of the things they're doing, you're seeing these entities that have subsidiaries that are supposed to be almost hands-free, hands-off. That you don't have these corporate requirements. So you might see if your firm has something like that and what are those entities doing. No one's doing Google. Google's a very frustrating firm to do because they have all these subsidiaries, but they don't really tell the markets what everybody's doing. They somewhat leave you in the dark. It's a somewhat of a non-transparent firm, so it's frustrating. But what is your firm doing in these subsidiaries? What new products are they doing? How is Apple actually trying to develop the next big thing? Are they doing it within the Apple structure? Are they doing it in a subsidiary? If they buy another company, do they let that company continue to operate autonomously? You think about GM when they started Saturn, and y'all probably have never heard of Saturn. You may have never seen a Saturn on the road, but GM started this new subsidiary, and they said, you don't have all of our employee costs, our pension plans, our health care. You don't have all the chargebacks that we have. You can start Saturn and do your own thing. And Saturn did great for a few years. And then GM started struggling. And so then they started saddling Saturn with all of their bad stuff. And now Saturn's completely out of business. I don't even know if you could see a Saturn driving around on the road. I'm sure there's a few of them left. So here's my point. Facebook and others, they just buy the competition. So think disruptive innovation, especially when you're talking about substitution threats. Who's out there that would take your entity out? Another way you can think about it is think about the history of the industry and what disruptive innovations have your industries had. That might be something to add to the introduction of your industry. What has disrupted your industry? Why did it happen? Where did it come from? who are the big players? Were they always the big players, or do you have some brand new firms that started just 5-10 years ago? Where did they come from? How quickly did they grow? Those type of things. Any questions on that? I'm giving you some ammunition for your interviews. This is all really. They may think you're a graduate student if you use all of this, but that's okay. I don't think they'll hold that too much against you. All right. So threats of substitutes. All right. So let's talk about the generic strategies. So, think back. Let me show you. So with Porter, you got the 5 forces. Then you have the generic strategies. What I want you to think about on generic strategies is how this applies to the structure of your industry. So Porter 5 forces, you'll talk about your industry. Generic strategies, usually talk about a company with them, but I want you to think about your industry with them. So there's 4 of them. There's cost leadership, there's differentiation, there's cost focus, and there's differentiation focus. So those are the 4 that you have. So cost leadership is economies of scale, the low cost provider. And as Porter says, there can only be one in the industry. Their product cannot be so inferior that it gets a reputation for being inferior. So what is the scuttlebutt on your company? What are people saying about it? So this was an issue for Spirit Airlines. Spirit Airlines got a really bad reputation because its customers got really mad. They would show up, they got this really cheap airfare, and they come to the airport, and suddenly they're paying all this money to check a bag or to get a meal, or really. And people are like, "Why are you nickeling and diming us together all over the place?" And Spirit Air finally figured out they need to advertise that, and they actually started making fun of their own firm. But they were a low-cost provider, but people were complaining about their product because of all this nickel and diming that they did. So they need to make sure they let their customers know, you want to spend your money on your vacation, you don't want to spend it on the air trip. So pack lightly, and you'll still come out ahead even if you pay for it. So that reputation is pretty important. So cost leaders must. So this is key on all of these. We're going to talk about this at Economic Moats. So write this in your notes. You got to talk about this. Where is your firm investing? What is your firm's CapEx? If your firm is a cost leader, they need to be investing such that it cuts the cost of their product and their expenses. They should be investing in economies of scale. What makes them cheaper? Now, I don't know what kind of detail you'll get on your firm with CapEx. You should really look for that. Where exactly are they investing? Where are they paying for their CapEx? If you think about that with differentiation, they're probably going to spend more. They're going to spend more money on what differentiates them, not on their costs. But if cost leadership's your thing, so if you're Spirit Airlines, you're going to be spending your money on whatever makes your flights cheaper, your planes cheaper to buy, your employees cheaper to hire. You're focusing on what gives you that cost advantage. And then when it comes to disruptive innovation, you're looking for someone coming in on the cheap side to offer an inferior product that's much cheaper. That's your biggest concern. You don't care. You're not that worried about a new differentiator coming in because they're going to have to advertise and make the point. You're focused on the cost leadership side. Now, some of you are doing Costco. You might want to do some analysis of Costco versus Walmart and see who does better. Unfortunately, with Walmart, it's very difficult to separate Walmart and Sam's and look at them separately at a very detailed level. And so obviously Costco is going to be much cheaper than Walmart because Walmart is not a warehouse kind of membership like Sam's is. Walmart is 2 things. But if you think your firm is a low-cost provider, then you should know it by taking their cost of goods sold and comparing it to their revenues and find some way to see, are they cheaper? You'll definitely, those of you doing Costco definitely has very, very thin margins, and so they make that up on turnover. And that's one thing we'll talk about with paper 4. Firms that are cost leaders, They have thin margins, but they have extremely high turnover. And so that's the thing you'll notice with these type of firms.
So, hey, Professor.
Uh-huh.
So how would you determine the price leader and the cost leader in your industry? Look for lower margins?
Look at the gross margins to start with. Usually cost leadership has very thin margins, but then they have high turnover. So you really can compare those two things. So if your firm is the cost leader, they will have the thinnest net and gross margin, and they will have the highest asset turnover. And we'll definitely get into that in the paper 4, but you want to talk about it here. In fact, you can go to that Excel file I created for you and look on that print page 2, and you'll see the gross margin, you'll see the net margin, and you'll see the asset turnover. And you can test that for your company and see if that's true about your company. I don't know if y'all know what asset turnover is. We'll get into it. But asset turnover is just sales divided by asset. And you're really talking about churn. You know, how many customers, foot traffic. You know, so Walmart has extremely high turnover, but very low margins. Tiffany's, that doesn't exist anymore. I can't think of a substitute. But Tiffany's has very, very wide margins, but very slow turnover. So that's the difference between a cost leader and a differentiator. And Shamir, that might work for you for the airlines. I'm not sure exactly how you would be able to approach that, but it might work for the airlines.
Okay.
It doesn't work for the tech companies very well. I think Lululemon and Nike, I think you're going to decide that they're definitely differentiators. And I'm not sure there is a cost leader in those industries other than maybe Walmart selling, you know, off-brand type of, you know, they may be selling Nike shoes, but at a different brand as, you know, as a kind of an in-store brand. Other questions on cost leadership? Okay, differentiated. Oh, well, yeah, Walmart, Costco, Southwest. And I even think with Southwest is a national cost leader, but they're definitely getting competition at the regional level. And I think Spirit's a pretty tough competitor. And I think it'd be interesting to see how Southwest does, especially now that they're changing their business model somewhat after some of the acquisitions they did. So it'd be interesting to see if they can stay as the cost leader. Okay, differentiation. So what we're looking for here is, is a way to be able to charge a premium price. So this is key. If your product is differentiated, you should be able to charge more for your product. And one thing you want to really think about with your company is how much more does it cost me to differentiate this product? So those doing Nike, I have good news on Nike. I did get Capital IQ to work. I don't know if any of the rest of you did, but it's actually quite simple. You just go to capitaliq.com and you create a new login using your UTSA.edu account, and they will get you in there. Has anyone else tried? I don't know. You know, Victor said he had it. I don't know if Victor got on tonight. But that's how I got it to work. If you're having trouble with it, let me know and I'll experiment a little bit more with it. And then they have a section called segments that you can go to, which would be interesting. They also have the income statement, and you can drill down, and that is the first place I've actually been able to find Nike showing their marketing expense. So you can actually look at Nike's marketing expense as a percentage of their revenues. Unfortunately, Lululemon did not have that information, but Adidas did. And I was surprised that Adidas and Nike have about the same spend on marketing. I would have thought Nike would have been higher. But if you want to ask the question, you know, how much more is Nike spending to differentiate themselves? Well, their marketing is probably the key. There may be something in how much it costs to actually produce the product, but their marketing is the key. How much more can they charge for their product because of that extra cost? So if it costs you an extra $5 per shoe that market, but you can only charge $4 more for the shoe, that's not gonna work. But if you can spend $5 in marketing, but that lets you charge $10 more for a pair of shoes, that works. So if you have, I think almost all of you are differentiators. Costco might be the one exception in here. Maybe Procter & Gamble is a cost leader. But I think almost all of you are differentiators. So you need to ask, what is your firm spending to make its product different from the competition? How much does that cost them? And then how much more do they get in premium, in a premium price? And I'll show you some articles that will actually help you with that.
Brother Sweet, I have a question. You said Costco may be different from the rest. I know Costco offers some in-store products, like a pizza and food and stuff. I'm not sure how much of their revenue comes from that and the sales of that, but would that also count as some form of differentiation?
I don't think that. I think that's still low cost. I don't think people are going to Costco because those in-store brands are superior. They're probably thinking they can get them at a cheaper price. I don't know.
We did a case study a few semesters ago on Costco. The majority of their profit comes from membership.
Yeah, membership fees. You definitely need to look at that. I've only been at Costco a few times. I was really impressed. The guy I ran into at the door, boy, that guy, he was doing 7 things at once, and he was friendly to everybody. So they obviously, they definitely pay their employees more, and that there's a service feature there that does raise their prices. You might check into that, how much more do they pay versus the $15 minimum wage everybody's talking about. They definitely pay their employees more than Walmart, and I could tell it just being in a Costco that their employees seem more passionate about the Costco brand. That raises your cost, so there could be some differentiation there maybe, but I'm not sure. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but that pizza is really good.
The pizza is what? Is really good?
It's really good.
Well, then they ask the question, how much does it cost for them to make it if it's that good? Because you usually can't make good pizza unless you're buying really good ingredients. And then are they actually getting a premium price for that, or is it just something they're adding to try to increase traffic into the store?
I know I go just for the pizza, and
Yeah.
I end up coming out with more stuff.
So I guess that's going to be up to us to look into.
Maybe part of the theory, yeah. You can definitely do some analysis. I haven't used Costco in a while because I don't need 80 gallons of something. But so anyway, think about it, and it's possible that a Walmart or Costco or Southwest has some differentiation. Certainly Southwest has the reputation for its employees being goofy and doing funny things and silly things that they incur. There's things you can differentiate. If you can have a differentiation, it doesn't cost you much to do it. That's ideal. That's wonderful. But Michael Porter argues that almost all, if not all, differentiation has a cost. You're going to have to spend some money to make it happen, at least to market it and get the reputation out there. That may not be true. It's possible there's some firms that can differentiate without doing that. But that's his argument. So the key is how much are they spending to get the differentiation, and then what is the premium that they're getting. So I want to show y'all, well, let's first talk about where you can differentiate. This comes from the class notes on page 7. So it can come from the product itself. So if you're doing Adobe, Adobe is the product itself. I don't know, there's other products. Adobe is somewhat of a monopoly when it comes to desktop publishing, and there's several industries that's all they use. They just Akamai, some of these others, they just have their niche, and it's the product itself, it's the product features. Well, if your firm differentiates itself from product feature, their CapEx better be on improving product features. That better be the #1 place where they spend their money. Some firms differentiate themselves on marketing. I remember reading an article on Tiffany's. If you look at Tiffany's jewelry and compare it to other competitors, it's hard to argue it's really that higher quality, that much better. However, there's people who just want something in that Tiffany's box. That it had that kind of aura to it, that it was something really special that you didn't get from a Kay's or somebody else. I forget who bought Tiffany's. It was I think, a non-U.S. Luxury brand. But yeah, some luxury brands, their products may not be all that spectacularly better. What they're selling is actually the brand. People want to wear their brand because it's status. They're selling status. And so, look at that, the marketing side. Service, That can be part of your product. USAA used to advertise its cell phone service. They've lost that a little bit, but that costs USAA a lot. USAA had to spend a lot of money hiring people to make their service as strong as they could. They had these requirements that you had to answer the phone within a certain amount of time. You had to be available on weekends. Now everybody's doing that in the industry, doing more stuff online, so it may not be as much of an advantage. Location, access, convenience, that can be important. I think Starbucks, you know, they're everywhere. That gives you an access kind of advantage. What we're going to talk about brand here. Brand is one of those economic moats. So brand identity. We'll talk a little bit, you know, exactly what does brand identity give you. I'm going to go to there next. And then we talk about this exclusivity. This is kind of the switching costs are the patent rights. You're the first out there. We'll talk about this with platform businesses. You know, Facebook's differentiation is that they're Facebook. So they got 3 billion customers and 3 billion users. That gives you a huge advantage because everybody wants to advertise on Facebook because they have all the users. That's a differentiation. How much did it cost Facebook to do that? Well, that's one question. The second question is how much does it cost Facebook to continue that? So, you know, in each one of these, wherever you have your differentiation, you've got to spend your money there. You cannot let that slip. If your differentiation is brand identity, then marketing becomes a big part of it as well. So maybe marketing and brand identity are kind of one and the same thing. So all right, before I go on the focus, I want to switch over to an article real quick. Y'all interrupt with questions if you have them. I love these two articles. I think they're really interesting. So what are brands? I have this linked later in the presentation, but I want to do it now. So what are brands and how do you value a brand? You might say, how in the world can you value a brand like Google or Apple? But I'm going to show you there's actually websites that do this. So I'd recommend you do this for your company. So the most valuable thing that company as diverse as Apple, McDonald's own is their brand. It's more valuable than their property and equipment. It can count for 30% of their stock value. Now, you want to ask, well, how do you calculate that? So I'll show you how you calculate it. Most of the time, they don't appear on the balance sheet anywhere. So if you go to Coca-Cola, it's true Coca-Cola may have some patents on their balance sheet, some trademarks, but that's just the unamortized cost of what their lawyers paid a few years ago. That's not the value of their brand. The brand inspires loyalty. We'll talk about why that's the case. Brand value may be declining. So if you're doing Procter & Gamble, that is a big issue for Procter & Gamble. They're starting to see that brand loyalty, especially with you millennials. You millennials don't really care that much about brand as much as previous generations have. And you can think about this yourself. You go to H-E-B, what do you buy? When I buy salt, I buy H-E-B salt. I don't need to spend an extra 5 cents on Morton salt.
That's because we trust H-E-B brand salt.
Yeah, we trust H-E-B, so there is a brand identity there. Same thing with laundry detergent and those kind of things. But that importance may be fading. In fact, brand identity for firms like Campbell Soup and Procter & Gamble, the brand value is really starting to decline. 3 components of brand identity: consumer awareness of the brand, what they associate with that brand, and then the loyalty itself. So how important brand is might be a debate on how important each one of these pieces is. How aware people are of the brand? What do they think of when they think of that brand? Obviously, BMW may be being replaced by Tesla now. Which are you more impressed with when someone drives? I'm surprised the cars some of you guys have. I'm a fairly wealthy guy and I drive these cheap $30,000, $40,000 cars, and I see people driving up in $60,000 cars and they're college students. But what impresses you more, seeing a student drive up in a BMW or driving up in a Tesla these days?
Depends what kind of BMW.
Yeah, what kind of Tesla as well. So, what do you associate with that? And then how loyal are they? Remember Apple several years ago, man, Apple comes up with a new product. I know several people, they were standing in lines to buy it. I don't know if that loyalty is as strong, but Apple came out with a new iPhone, and I know several people 3-4 years ago, they were the first to buy it. But I don't think that's true now. I don't think they come up with an Apple whatever. It has the same that it used to have. So why does that loyalty kind of decline over time? Is because there's new competitors? Are people just getting tired of it? Are people noticing that the difference in quality is not that great? So think about that with your firm. Pretty important stuff. So obviously, if you have brand, you can charge more for your product. And your customers might forgive you when you do mess up. This is something that was a big issue for me at USAA. USAA has a tremendous loyalty from its customers, but you're starting to notice that starting to get chipped away because USAA has done some stuff recently that's hurt their brand. I still think they have a good brand because they're in a really horrible industry, and they're one of the few more trustworthy firms in a really, really unethical industry. But the problem with trust being your brand is you only have to do one stupid thing that hits the headlines and you can destroy that overnight. So you have to also ask about what could destroy this brand. So United, had a brand issue with dragging a guy off the plane, but they weren't known for great quality service to begin with. So it really didn't hurt the firm much at all. But some firms, that's more important than others. It makes it easier for shoppers to cut time. So remember what Porter said, on differentiation, you either cut someone's costs or you improve their performance. If someone goes into the store and they just know that Tide is the brand they've always bought, their clothes are always clean, I don't have to go out and research what's the best detergent. I've been using Tide, it works. I don't have to spend 30 minutes in the aisle at H-E-B deciding what detergent I'm going to buy. Saves me time, it works. That is part of your brand awareness, that value to the customer. You don't want them rethinking that question for some reason because you have some scandal that hits or something along those lines. So awareness is important. So what does that mean for brand identity? The firm better be spending on brand awareness, which means they better be on Facebook. They better be on Google searches, right? Advertising. If your firm brand is really important, where are they advertising now? Now right here, look at these 3 companies, and you might Google these companies. These are old. This is a 2013, but these are 3 firms that actually value brand value. What is the value of Google? You can see where they have it anywhere from, I don't know what that is, 70 billion up to 160 billion. That's not the value of Google. That's the value of Google's brand. IBM, I'm surprised IBM's still up there. McDonald's, obviously their brand's very, very high. Coca-Cola, Samsung, AT&T, I'm surprised AT&T's brand's up there. Amazon. I imagine these things have changed dramatically, but I should try this. I should have done this before the class, is go out and find their websites and see what they will actually provide to you on their brand value. So how do you actually value the brand? I don't remember if it's in this article or not. But the way you value a brand is you take the premium price minus the additional costs to produce the differentiation, and you multiply that by how many products you're selling. So it's essentially your gross margin advantage. So if, I don't know, between, let's say Tide's gross margin is 30 cents, and the next competitor is 20 cents. So they have a 10-cent advantage on their gross margin. So it's after they pay for the brand, after they pay for differentiation, they get an extra 10 cents for the product, and they sell $1 billion a year. Then that means that their brand value of Tide is $10 million or $100 million. It's 10% of $1 billion. Now, I'm not saying you would go out and do a brand valuation because it's probably really difficult to do, but it does come down to how much higher is your gross margin because you spent money on this differentiation. Questions on that? I mean, this is pretty cool stuff. Some of y'all are probably already Googling these three companies.
Can you say the formula again?
The formula is, it's not your gross margin. The formula is your additional gross margin because of your differentiation. Okay, so you can't just say, well, Costco's gross margin is X, so that's what they're, no, you can't, and it's, let me type it out since I'm in here in Word, because I didn't actually say it completely. So it's actually brand value equals the present value of the additional gross margin due to brand loyalty. So, and the brand loyalty premium, I guess you can say, let me change it. Don't write this down exactly. We call it brand price premium. Well, even that, I'm sorry. I'm doing this off the top of my head. So I'm going to say brand price premium minus the cost of brand creation. Let me do it like that. Does that make more sense? It's the present value of your gross margin. That's due to how much more you can charge for the product minus how much you have to spend to get that brand identification, brand creation. So if Tide gets an additional 10 cents per each box of Tide it sells, that's the net. So they get an extra 10. So I actually didn't say it right. So let's say they get an additional 10 cents in price, and it costs them 3 cents in advertising and product ingredients. I don't know if Tide's detergent really is so much better that it costs them an extra penny or two to make it. Then that means each product has a gross margin advantage of 7 cents. So you take that 7 cents times how many products they're going to sell in the future. You take the present value of that, and that's the value of the brand. So you can see it'd be a really, really hard number for you to calculate. It'd be tough for you. You'd have to really get into detail of each of these products. And that's why you see up here, you get such wide differences in these brands. On some of them you don't. Verizon is pretty close. Toyota, that's pretty amazing that Toyota is that close. So maybe on some products like building cars, it's easier to actually calculate that. It probably is pretty easy to tell how much more a Toyota costs to build and how much more you can charge for a Toyota versus a Ford or a GM. All right, so sorry, I was doing off the top of my head, so I kind of got it confused there. Does that make sense? Whoever asked the question, does that make sense? Or anybody else? All right, thanks, Ryan. All right. They talk about, Kellogg's, a lot of these brands, they're really struggling right now with this issue of brand and how to keep their brands out there. I don't have a TV, so I have no idea what advertisements are out there. I don't see their advertisements on Facebook. If I were to type the word cereal in a Google search, I'm sure on Facebook I would see all kinds of cereal advertisements all of a sudden. But I don't notice that. But you definitely, for your company, want to go out there. If brand is key for your company, go out there and see what advertising they're doing. Whom are they appealing to? What's the focus? What's the market that they're trying to appeal to? Is it a bunch of, is Coca-Cola still doing the 20-somethings on the beach running around with a Coke? Or is it baby boomers drinking a Coke since millennials don't drink sodas anymore? What exactly is their focus of their advertising? So why is brand identity not as strong? It's because we have much easier access now of actually comparing products very quickly and seeing what we want to do, what we want to buy. We can very quickly. We also have this concept of influencers. You've probably heard of influencers. People willing to spend a lot of money on a YouTube that can go viral, and they can get their product out there really fast, much faster than they've done in the past. You hire some famous person, they do something goofy on a YouTube video, and then you just wait for it to spread like wildfire. You don't have to spend money on marketing. It just goes around for free. Pretty amazing stuff. I think President Trump kind of took advantage of that in 2016. A lot of free advertising just by being a little bit off the wall, a little bit unusual. So that's different today, where brands can actually have wings of their own and take off almost overnight. Accounting for brands, can you actually see this in the financial statement somewhere? So accounting rules prohibit companies from recognizing brands as an intangible asset. The value of a brand is revealed when another company buys it, so that might be your goodwill. If you buy another firm, the goodwill you're paying, you may be paying the present value of that brand identity, or at least a big part of that might be that. But you're not going to find the value of brand on the balance sheet or the income statement anywhere. It's just not, it's too subjective and too difficult. So did anybody find anything on these three valuers? I'll look after this class. Interbrand might be a good one to do a Google search on, because it has a pretty unique, it might be interbrand.com, and it's got the word brand and then brand finance, both of those. So I'll check afterwards, but.
Hey, Professor Sweet.
Uh-huh.
Is there any way to calculate like the brand value, by coming up with a valuation of your own and then just subtracting, the market value, or coming up with a, I guess, equity value that you think makes sense, and then comparing that to market value?
You can certainly back into it. You're gonna have to make some assumptions. You can definitely go out and look at, you can go on the internet and see how much more. You got to find two products that are essentially identical, but they get to charge X and other company charges Y. So you can get that differentiation in premium. Then what you got to ask, why are they getting that differentiation? If it's marketing, then you can definitely do what I was talking about with Nike versus Adidas. How much more does Nike spend on advertising than a typical company in the industry? Because that's probably the main thing. You can look at the cost of goods sold and see how much more the cost of goods sold is. I don't know how much more expensive it is to make a Nike than it is versus making an Adidas. You might be able to do it. I've never tried doing it, and I think it would be a challenge to do. But you can try it. The better would be if you could actually find someone else who's done it that has the inside information, like one of these firms that might share that. It might be proprietary information. You have to pay them a fee to actually get it.
Professor Sweet, I got a follow-up question.
Uh-huh.
You said per GAAP, you can only, account for brands via, acquisition and goodwill. Does that mean that companies that acquire, new business lines as opposed to developing them internally have artificially higher valuations, all things equal?
Well, I mean, that is the downside of goodwill, because it's, I don't think goodwill is 100% brand, but, when you build it yourself, you're then going to have to spend a lot of money on advertising and getting, building the market share. So you're going to spend a lot of money anyway. Maybe that's not going to be as much as goodwill. So, if you buy a firm at a premium of $1 billion, but it's going to cost you $1.2 billion to do it yourself, so every one of those kind of evaluations is their own unique stories. So I don't think there is a one answer to that. It's quite complex, especially with a firm that does more than one thing. So you take a Procter & Gamble, they have how many brands? It's just maybe 1,000 brands. You'd have to do that analysis brand by brand, piece by piece by piece. It would get almost impossible. Even Apple, does Apple have the same price premium for each one of its products? My guess is the Apple Watch probably has a higher premium than the laptop now, or the iPod. That'd be my guess. I don't know for sure. So I don't know. I've never tried it myself. I like the concept, and I think it's an important concept to think about it when you're talking about the industry and how companies differentiate themselves in the industry. All right. All right. Anything else on differentiation? Most of y'all will probably be discussing that. So remember, this is real important. On papers 1 and 2, differentiation, you're only talking about it in terms of defining the industry. how do players in the industry differentiate themselves? Then in paper 3, you'll talk about how your company that you're doing differentiates itself. All right, so I always have at least 1 or 2 students that paper 1 is all about their company, and I'm trying to avoid that so we don't have that problem. All right, and then focus. With focus strategy, you either focus on cost leadership or on differentiation, but you have a niche market. I'm not sure how many of y'all, so definitely airlines, CarMax. I'm not sure with CarMax if, if there's some regional, obviously you're talking about, having a relative that has a used car lot. So, that can kind of be the niche player, but I doubt it's the same what they're talking about here. So I don't know, Lockheed and Honeywell, I don't know if there's niche players there. It's possible. So it's hard for me to know how many focus there are in here. Adobe, a firm like Adobe, NVIDIA, Texas Instruments, those type of firms, I could definitely see there's some niche players. A semiconductor firm who's coming in specifically create semiconductors just for this particular application, whether it's healthcare, something like that, I could certainly see that. So at least think about it, whether it's on the cost side, it's on the airlines, obviously you have cost leadership, that's the regional airlines. Our differentiation where you're going after one unmet need. There's some line, there's some share of the market that's not being met by the current players, and someone is coming in and taking care of that. Most of y'all have picked large national or even global companies, so most of y'all do not have a focus. So I don't see any of y'all that are a focus company, but you may have companies coming in that are a focus threat to your company. So that's probably the better way to think about it. Their goal is to not expand too quickly. If they expand too quickly, the big players will take them out very quickly. They have to be very careful, and they need to stick with their niche market for quite a while. Once they go to other markets, they start angering their niche market, and they lose that group really, really fast, and then another disruptor will come in and take that market. So we'll see. I haven't seen too many discussions of focus. So you could completely ignore focus in your paper if you like to, but you definitely should be talking about differentiation and cost leadership in papers 1 and 3. All right. Questions up to there. I want to talk about economic moats. I don't know how far we'll make it on economic moats. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions. So I'm giving you economic moats, so you have another great arsenal for your interviews. There will come a time where economic moats will be overused and you won't sound state of the art, but I have not really been hearing undergraduate students using this term much, so I think it's still an advantage. It's very closely related to Porter, but it's not identical. So economic moats is, the key is, I don't have the phrase here, so you want to write this in your notes. I should have put it, it may be on a later slide. It's a sustainable competitive advantage. Sustainable competitive advantage. And it comes out in pricing power. If you have an economic moat, but you can't charge more as a result, it's not an economic moat. So it's a competitive and it's sustainable. That's important. It's a sustainable, it's a competitive advantage. It's something that you have that your competitors do not have. They can't copy it. And because you have it, you can charge more for your product. Okay? It's part of the structural nature of the business. So you can't separate it from the business. It's part of the business. You're going to see that as we go through some examples here. And so it insulates the business from competition. That's why it's called a moat. It's like a moat around a castle. Protects you from someone coming in and attacking you. Warren Buffett is a huge economic moat guy. I don't know who created it. I was trying to find, I used to know the history of it, but I don't know the history of it. I don't think Warren Buffett is the creator of it. I listened to a podcast that was really exceptional on that, and I've stolen a lot of that podcast and just put it into this presentation, so you don't need to listen to the podcast. The guy who did that podcast had a book out, so I went and bought his book, and his book was not very good at all. So I don't recommend his book. But I do think economic moats is a really important concept. What Warren Buffett says is most of Wall Street doesn't know how to value economic moats. And brand identity is one of them. So we were just talking about that, Zach was asking about valuing the brand. It is one of those economic moats that's very hard to value. So let's talk about a few of them. We'll see how far we'll go a few more minutes here. I know online's a little tough to stay completely engaged, but hopefully you're still with me. So the first one is the one most people think of first, and that's patents, licenses, or some kind of exclusive dealing that you have. The problem with patents and licenses is you also usually pick up some kind of regulatory requirements. That's the whole reason you're getting a patent, or especially a license, is you're exposing yourself to some new law, some new regulation. No one's doing pharmaceuticals. Obviously, with pharmaceuticals, patents is a huge, huge thing. That's why pharmaceuticals are so difficult to value. You can't just take the present value of the drug they're selling. You got to figure out, when does that drug go off a patent, and then what happens at that point. Are the the off-brand's going to come out, the generic drug's going to come in. So that may be true. Some of you are doing now. Adobe patent might be a huge protection for Adobe. Some of y'all may have something along those lines that really protects you. Nike maybe has. Netflix might have some patents that protect people from exactly copying them. I don't know what that might be, because it seems like everybody's doing what they're doing too. I don't think patents is a strong economic moat today. Essentially, the government's giving you a monopoly, but with certain requirements that they're going to put on top of you that get that monopoly. Exclusive distribution systems can provide a moat. However, you usually get lawsuits for that. So if someone says, hey, Apple has had this problem with their apps. To get your app on Apple, you got to do all these things, and obviously Microsoft has had those issues. Google's had these issues where you have these exclusive relationships. Governments have been suing. Other firms have been suing. So exclusive distribution sounds wonderful. To get my product, you have to use my product and nobody else's product. That almost always leads to a lawsuit. So it sounds too good to be true, and it usually is too good to be true. So the restrictions might actually hurt your ability to sustain the returns above your cost of capital. So, that's another thing with economic moats I should have pointed out. Most firms with economic moats have higher returns than the required return. One thing I put into your Excel file is the economic value added. Hopefully you had that in a previous class. Economic value added, or EVA. Firms with economic moats should have very positive economic value addeds, very positive EVAs, and that's something you can look at with your firm. And it should be consistent or even growing if they have a true economic moat. All right. Okay, I tell you what, I tend to not go the full 75 minutes because of the online, because I want to leave time for questions, specific company questions. So I think I want to stop here, and we'll start with brand identity on Tuesday.